after the break. Now, we have just heard this. The funding, public funds are lavish. They are more than anything else. So money is not the problem, but money is not the only thing that counts. But we need also staff. We need, well, for the next round, I would like to welcome the following guest, Ingmar Streese, State Secretary for Transport in Berlin. A cordial welcome to you. Then Ronny, Meyer, a cordial welcome, State Councillor for Climate Protection, Environment and Mobility in the city of the Hanse Bremen. Moin. Nils Busch-Petersen from the Trade Association Berlin-Brandenburg. We will talk about the retail industry that we just touched upon, from the Ostfalia, the Academy for Applied Sciences, Professor Jana Kühl and Rebecca Peters. I would also like to welcome you. She is the deputy chairperson of the Federal Association of ADFC, Ingmar Streese. My first question goes to you. I just read an interview with your boss, Regine Günther, in Zeit Weekly. I quote from this interview towards the end. She states, whenever I talk to people in Germany, I will be asked, why am I pushing the accelerator so much? Why must it be so quick? And whenever I travel to other countries, they ask me, why is it so slow in Germany? Is this slow pace the biggest obstacle to implementation? I would say it's one obstacle. There are so many other impediments or obstacles. You have shown this. It depends also on the system in which you act. In Berlin, we have very strong boroughs. This results from our long history as a major conurbation. There is a huge demand for coordination, so coordination takes time. Smaller municipalities have an easier life because they have just one mayor and one city councillor, and then they can implement it. It's at the end of the day, it all boils down to political will. If you have unanimity in the administration, then everything goes smoother. For example, everybody wants, every state agency wants more bike traffic, then it runs smoothly, like in Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg. Well, Bremen is one of the cities with the highest modal share of bike, 23%. So you have a very well-established and well-developed network of bikeways. How will you put to use the additional funds? I wouldn't say it's a problem for us. We are always happy to receive funding. But there is another resource which is much scarcer than the public funds. That's the human resource, HR. We need many more experts, people who know a thing or two about bike transport. We know that other cities get into going as well, so we are competing for the brightest minds. So there are not so many people who are knowledgeable about bike infrastructure. So it's a huge task, not only to make sure we have the funds, but also the expertise and the man and women power to implement those projects. Professor Kühl, you are the first professor for bike traffic management. What is needed for bike managers, bike commissioners tomorrow, also in view of the international context, which we are discussing all the day? Hello. Well, the very first thing is basic knowledge about what, after all, is good bike transport planning together with a set of rules. We've heard it. So many things are stopped by a lack of coherence with the codes, legal codes. So you need to know how you work with these things, but you need to be knowledgeable also about processes, how you can implement bike transport projects. It requires a great deal of stamina. You need not buckle down or bow down as soon as you have the first impediments or opposition, because if there is any counter attack or counter movement, it's to no avail just to insist on your direction. No, you need to manage those processes in a proactive way. So it's important also to find a way into practice early on and to work out a common path to practice, because you cannot teach everything in theory. Mr. Busch-Petersen, what's your idea of the inner cities and also the shopping miles in the future? You and your trade associations? Well, it would be a topic that would stretch well beyond today's discussion, because we are just witnessing radical redefinition of certain things due to the current events of corona pandemic. In all likelihood, we will also see a massive acceleration of structural change. Not totally new developments, but a considerable acceleration with a considerable impact also on the space demand of the inner city retail. We are by far not one of the major problems. No, we are always looking for the appropriate means of transport. The means of transport are selected by the customers. And of course, we want to be reachable in a suitable way. We want to give also to give the customer an opportunity or a means to carry home the goods that they have just bought in the retail shop. So this is also in conflict with a certain type of vehicles like delivery vans. Ms. Petersen, what is needed to accelerate the network development? What is needed to develop the bike route network in the short run? Well, what is needed is a concrete plan. What is the design of such a network? Cities and municipalities need to have a clear picture of where bicycle infrastructure is needed and where it is existent or not existent. Because not only do we talk about a comprehensive network, we also talk about suitable networks. Moreover, you need to make sure that networks are not just connections between A and B. You need also intermediate connections as well as major routes. But then you need to make sure which instruments are the right ones to implement such a bike transport infrastructure. Professor Kühl, it is very difficult for so many cities and municipalities to find properly trained experts. We are talking here about this huge problem of man or women power. How can it succeed? Well, one first step has already been taken by creating, all in all, 7 chairs of professors for bicycle transport. For the very first time, we have academic capacities to teach bicycle transport. Yes, of course, it was also a topic of our transport studies, but we have now additional capacities with no less than 7 professor tenures for bicycle studies. So we need to, in a second step, we need to train experts that are able to bring this into the administrative process and into the planning process. That's one thing. We try to do this, to tackle this in the context of the new professors. We want to roll out bike traffic on a large scale. Not only do we train our own experts, but we open up to other areas. For example, whoever studies things like tourism or media studies can certainly also drop by and can listen in and can get credit points. So traffic themes are quite often linked to cooperative arrangements. The idea behind this is that funds from tourism promotion and from business promotion be already alerted to problems of bike transport so as to smoothen the way in upfront for new ways.
I would also like to pass on this question to the municipalities. Mr. Meyer, what is the situation in your department? How many staff do you have, and what approaches do you have to find solutions? So we have a considerable lack of staff. We try to fill our vacancies, but as I just said, we manage to do this less and less well. And now we think about hiring other specialists that might have to do something to do with engineering and maybe energy planners can also be used for road planning. This would only be an emergency solution. We would prefer to have young graduates from cycling management from universities, but they are not there. Therefore, we also try to win over other engineers to get enthusiastic for cycling. Public service is an attractive employer. So, and then it means that once we are in favor of hiring someone, it can be a lifelong position for that person. Maybe the salaries are not the highest. For example, when it comes to cycling bridges, we would also need cycling engineers here, but we often see that we are not really competitive when it comes to salaries. But when it comes to family working life, we are definitely in a beneficial situation, and in most cases people stay here when they start here. What about the situation in Berlin? What about the lack of staff in order to use the money that is available, and how do you solve this question? What incentives can you give? So Mr. Meyer described it well for Bremen. It's similar in Berlin. In various areas, particularly bridges, not only bicycle bridges, but others as well. In all planning areas, we have difficulties filling vacancies, and therefore training more specialists and having more professorships also for cycling management is very important. But one would also have to get a reorientation to people so that they can also get interested in cycling management. So the districts in Berlin pay smaller salaries than the city as a whole. 2 city managers per borough were allocated, but we could not fill all these positions. 18 out of 24 could only be filled. And some of the staff members, they also leave us and start working for a national authority because they pay better. So it is really a problem that one needs to tackle jointly. Partly we do that with our specialists, and we also go to universities and give lectures there in order to raise students' interest for issues of public interest. What about looking for experts from abroad? We have heard of great examples from abroad. To also look for specialists abroad. We do not have any recruitment teams, but we would be happy to have volunteers who want to apply for a job. But we do not want to take to carry out a brain drain and take the good people away from other cities. Mr. Busch-Petersen, I would like to discuss with you and to compare the chances of redesigning inner cities and what are the risks. Let us start with the opportunities. When we transform the inner cities, what are the chances and risks for retail? We see in our industry that there is good progress made with a continuous transformation, partly also with disruptive changes. If you want to survive, and certainly inner cities will have to be newly defined after the end of the pandemic, which keeps us so busy, particularly in the field of retail. There are new forms of uses, and so it can't be the objective to replace businesses and shops that have had to close down are now kept by dentists and others. So there are many applications for bankruptcy and short-term work, and there are also potentials of properties that become vacant in those cases where department stores had to close down. And all that has also an impact on traffic, and then it will be time to rearrange things with all the players involved. And we are not only prepared for that, but we don't have any other choice than adjusting to that. We also know that many of the retailers face a hard life with changes, parking lots that has been mentioned as a problem, and we are highly interested in getting involved in that discussion in order to find solutions. There are not only best practice examples, but in Berlin there are also examples, poor examples, which are due to lack of good communication, and we should learn from those. And we should then make headway by joining forces of all players, and actually, you do not get into a shop by bicycle or by a car, with the exception of some places in Hamburg. But you can get into shops as a pedestrian, and therefore it is very important that it is attractive for pedestrians to walk on these city paths. I would like to know whether all these experiences that we gain and that the retailers also see whether this has a repercussion. There's always the same thing when there are plans for a car-free commercial street, then the retailers are in panic because they think that customers could not reach them anymore. But reality shows that people stay longer in these shopping malls when they go there either on foot or by bicycle. Has this big outcry changed? What do you think in the perception of the people? You cannot leave this thesis, and you cannot leave an antithesis there. You cannot say that as soon as I free a road from cars, the road is in a better position. This is not enough. Certainly there are examples, but have a look at Berlin. Have a look at the pedestrian zones. Maybe that's our problem, because we have a poor history. We have Spandauer city center with a pedestrian zone which has continuously problem. We have a Wilmersdorfer Straße, which also causes problems, and Köpenick Altstadt, which is so quiet that there's no trade and retail taking place whatsoever. So maybe it would make sense to include more international examples. Currently, we only have 3 poor examples in Berlin, and then there is a poor attempt with Berlin-Friedrichstraße. Well, somebody objected, but you don't have to earn money there. So you promise people that we do something for people who want to stroll along, but at the end, if you have cyclists go along from one end to the other, then actually it is not good for people who want to stroll quietly along the streets, but it's very fast. So we said and suggested that this should be done at a different time, not in autumn when it's very dry or very wet, but it could be done in summer. And we should then have experiments in the summer. And the worst thing about this try is that over weeks and months before the test starts, at least the actual condition of a street should be analyzed in order to evaluate what the results of the tests are. Because if this is not done, then it is really very hard to assess the experiment afterwards. Mr. Streese, you said you wanted to contradict and object. Of course, you can do that now, but please present it in a way that everybody understands what you're talking about, not only the Berliners. Would you tell us what could have been done differently? What is your point of view? Well, I think this is not typically typical of Berlin. In some cities, there are pedestrian zones for years. Mr. Meyer also knows this situation from Bremen. In Berlin, this is rather untypical. We do have this concentric city, and we try many things in order to make the city more attractive for pedestrians. The Friedrichstraße street was mentioned, but here I have to contradict to what you said, because strolling and walking has become very good there. Previously, the footpaths were very narrow. Now they are very broad. No accidents had to be registered. The police did not have to register any conflicts, so it was a peaceful coexistence. But maybe this is not so super valid because it was now this year, the year 2020 is very unusual, and therefore the results of this experiment cannot be as valid as any other experiment. I'm optimistic that the results of the experiment will be good. So far it looks good, and then every week or month we survey data and collect data concerning the satisfaction of customers, of people, and then we will see what the result will be. And then there's another area, Kudam town scene, and they said the users, they wanted to take cars out there as well, or introduce new concepts, and maybe one cannot always apply the same concept to different boroughs.
Ms. Peters, from the ADFC standpoint, if we break down this entire debate, what can we take home as a lesson for everybody? What would you say? Well, first, from the ADFC point of view, which is also a member of the ADFC, we have seen that taking out the cars in the worst of all cases triggers no changes, or in the best of all cases leads to a 40% increase of sales. We have so many examples, especially from the surrounding area of Berlin. And in Germany we find good examples. La Galerie, the Gallery Lafayette, for example, welcomes this reallocation of spaces. And I think, by the way, that we need to address the question of narratives, communication, and so on. We need to talk to each other much more closely, not only when the decision has been taken. Various stakeholders, the opposition, critical voices need to be heard. Quite often these voices are not so critical after all, but they are willing to join forces. They need to have a place around the table. So what can be implemented quickly and free of conflicts to reach a solution that can be supported by everybody? So that's the second big chapter to be addressed. Let's work on the narratives. We should communicate less what is no longer possible, what is banned, what is bad. Now we should talk about the benefits for all of us, what the positive effects are, because most of the times they are prevailing. Professor Kühl, to what extent is the topic of communication an issue in training in the academic teaching? Well, frankly, I need to say that we have just started embarking on this integration of bicycle transport topics in our ordinary course of studies. We are rolling this out in the sense of creating a discipline. The communication is, of course, of crucial importance because look at the public debate. The topic of traffic transition towards a more eco-friendly way is very conflict-ridden. It's so hotly debated. So we need to communicate this to our students. How can we go about it? There are different opinions. Of course, different concepts clash with each other. And we need to take it seriously that so many people have gotten accustomed for decades to think only in terms of the motor car, and they feel unsafe or they feel somehow squeezed into new patterns if they can no longer exercise this type of mobility. They feel uneasy. So we need to give some thought to this. How can we bring the various sides together? Our big advantage at the faculty is that we can cooperate with the area of media and communication. So there is a huge interest in binding together know-how and make a connection between transport and communication. And we need to think also more in terms of campaign, not just problems and projects that crop up, no, but just think about this. How can we create a change of mind? How can we open up people's minds for other forms of mobility? How can we demonstrate that societies can work also without the car? It's a change of narrative, and that's exactly the direction in which we need to go. We need to show proactively alternatives, and this is a communicative task that should be taught at the universities. Mr. Meyer, how well can one communicate those visions, or just is it just about living it? Shouldn't we, for example, organize more joint travels with your critics, for example, just to bring it home to people that things can work out smoothly? Quite often we have the outcry. What's your take on this in Bremen? We have a twofold approach. We have carried out a very meticulous planning of the major bike routes in inner city of Bremen, reachability of Bremen downtown, and increase of the staying quality, and even in times of Corona, 5 million of promotional funds. We did not argue about climate protection or transport transition. We focused on another team. We created also a world of pictures. That's how we brought this home. The Chamber of Commerce criticized us severely, and we expected that. And for the very first time, they could not win out in the public sphere. People did not understand. The local residents could not understand why the local traders rejected our offer, our generous offer of 5 million euros in extra funding. So the public at large did not understand it. What are the other messages that we can send apart from what we have known already for a long time? Second, we also prepare a design for the car-free inner city. We wanted to pay visits to the car-free inner cities in Europe, which is no longer possible due to Corona. But what is still possible, you can bring in representatives from other cities, or you can take looks at these cities via video. And we saw it again and again. At the beginning, everybody is against these car-free inner cities, and in the end, everybody likes it. So it's normal. People are used to certain habits. For example, if for years and years they use the ordinary parking space, we want to change this. And you need to manage a change process. Part and parcel of this is also to highlight good practices from other countries. Okay, let me now open up a conclusive round. I was deeply impressed by this number. 74% in our poll state that the political will is not there to knuckle down to work, to implement those projects, or projects like the ones we heard about today. In our conclusive round of discussions, Mr. Streese, how can we disentangle this dilemma that all the actors, the players, again and again have the feeling there is not enough political will? The heaps of money that are ready to be spent cannot be spent because there is no political will. One aspect of this is certainly that the civil society, all the interested citizens that want to have better bikeways, better walking precincts, less motor cars. Well, some boroughs are more willing, more inclined than others, but you find smaller and bigger initiatives everywhere that are committed to a further development of bike infrastructure. So get into going in the civil society, involve yourselves. The other thing is we communicate in our administration in a very transparent way to the citizens what we plan. Participatory rounds, we have hearings, public hearings, events. Well, quite often it's about large new buildings. So we create trust in transparency. And we had also this Mr. Streese pointed this out. Well, quite often people take a differing view in the mall systems, also Stockholm, London. People were against it, the car-free zones, but now they are all in favor. Mr. Busch-Petersen, from your point of view, what can you provide in terms of support or motivation towards politicians so that they can muster more courage to take the bold decision for a transport transition? Well, what matters is that in the debates, in the run-up, and also in the parallel debates during the project, and I think this has come out quite clearly in this round, there is an interaction, respect, and also acceptance need not to lean back. As some people today did again. Well, the majority is against it. So I would say we have a symbiotic interconnection between the trade and the city. Trade is at the very core of the genesis of all cities in the first place. We need, therefore, also a permanently based retail sector. The retail sector must stay. Now, we need to do away with this demonization, the retail sector. Well, Chamber of Commerce, it was clear that they are up in arms against this pedestrian precinct. Well, we need not forget certain things. We need to make sure that there are delivery zones so that delivery vans can safely park and unload. There is a constructive debate going on. We tried it out for the first time in the Karl-Marx-Straße in Berlin-Neukölln. So we need to listen to each other with greater care and greater attention. The trade is willing to follow along good lines, But please accept also that certain things are simply not convincing. Well, if most of the projects have not run well, you must accept that we find it more difficult to start a new experiment. So experiments need to be prepared better in a wiser way. That is what matters. And what matters more than anything else, looking beyond the horizon of your own world. Quite often we pay visits to other major cities of trade, Paris, London. We should also look, and we also took trips to Poland. In the next excursion, we will look at a very innovative solution for bike traffic. So I've learned something. Great. Mr. Meyer, do you think that in local politics we need more visionaries, and how do we get them? I cannot talk on behalf of all local municipal politicians. I know Ingmar Streese fairly well, and also Mr. Busch-Petersen. But even if you have very passionate and committed local politicians, and I know many of them that are committed to the cause of bike traffic, but at the end of the day, you need to convince thousands and thousands, dozens of thousands of people in their everyday mobility behavior. So citizens' participation is of the essence, and this takes time. These are democratic processes. You may be as motivated. I'm a passionate biker, but I understand that we need to convince people. At times it takes a longer time that I would wish to see. And I know it from fellow city planners. They have similar experiences. They have ideas, and they have bold ideas that at times clash with the code of traffic, but we do it for the citizens, and the citizens must place their trust in us, and they need to be convinced. And I need to take a self-critical view, because quite often it takes time. Those administrative processes can be time-consuming, because there might be also opposing sets of regulations at a land level or at a federal level. So as much as you are committed to this cause, it's an uphill battle at time. But for Bremen, this does not mean that we would not continue down this road. We want to continue this road in a very committed way. Professor Kühl, what do you teach your students from the overarching idea down to the everyday implementation?
Well, I think it is crucial that you always try to give clear and good examples, and we got many of them today, in order to demonstrate that you can achieve something if you are courageous. And you, of course, need some persistence. And if you do so, then people can see and feel for themselves that other forms of mobility can also work. The qualities that you create once you have other modalities, traffic modalities in place, can be better understood. And you should try not to convince people all by yourself, but you should try to mobilize others. There are many people who wish to see a different modal split in cities and a higher quality of life in cities. And so far, it can really be useful to show that these are not just partial interests. Mrs. Peters, in conclusion, our question is, the ADFC is already very active in public and political discussions. What maybe can you do even more so in order to give more courage to politicians? I think the word courage is the most important one. We at least know what it means to have a perseverance, because what we do here, we have not only started doing it today, but 40 years ago, since its beginning, we know the most important stakeholders, we know who is critical, but we also know where we can find players who support us. So we are not just the association that criticizes and demands things, but it's also an association that builds bridges, that creates contacts, and that knows exactly where things need to be improved in local networks. And here, in this current period of transformation, where that much money is available from the climate package, we see ourselves in a new role. We do not only demand things, but we are prepared to make our input. We have a lot of expertise. This is also a new role for us, and we have to get used to that. But we need to find other stakeholders and synergies, and then we will be successful with the traffic transformation. Many thanks to all the panelists of this last round of discussion, and thank you for having taken your time. Thank you. Now, in conclusion, I would like to ask Burkhard Stork to join me. He is still wearing his face mask, but he will lift it so that you understand him better. So, against the background of the last discussion, we would like to know what your last ideas are. The word I will use most often is thank you, but let me start content-wise. I said earlier on, it's the 5th time that we hold such a huge international symposium in November. Of course, last year we could not have imagined to do it from a studio, but we would have thought that it would be held in a big hall. It's the 5th symposium. 4 years ago, I brought a photo along. We did the symposium in Mannheim. It was the day after the election of Donald Trump to become the president, and Martha Roskowski now had this position, and she faced a hard time to say anything about these elections. So today the situation is different, and Martha, I hope that you feel much better today because the elections this year have ended differently. When we heard this presentation by Martha, we heard something about Rogers, Arlington. Rogers is a city where nobody could imagine that there would ever be a cycling network. Therefore, one tried for a few days a cycling network, and what was the term coined for that? Pop-up bike lane. Today, it's a word that was used for the first time today. You find it everywhere. When in 3, 4, or 5 years' time, we will go onto the streets and we will see many things that we have discussed today here, like we do today with pop-up bike lanes. Then we would really be happy if many of the things that were discussed today can be implemented with lots of funds that are made available by the federal government, and we would be extremely happy about this success. To round up this symposium, now I'd like to thank. First of all, I would like to thank you, dear listeners at home. Let me tell you, we had more than 1,000 listeners at peak times. This is incredibly much, and we are really very grateful that you are so loyal. Catering for 1,000 people, we could never have afforded that. And the Federal Office of the Environment certainly would not have paid for that. Insofar, it is great to have chosen this format because we could involve many more people than normally. Many, many thanks. So among the listeners, and that is the advantage of a video conference, there was also Mrs. Lambeck, the officer in charge of cycling in the Federal Ministry of the Environment. Our boss did not welcome you. Therefore, let me do it now. And we're very happy that you are with us and that you help municipalities to implement all these projects. Mrs. Lambeck, many thanks. I would like to thank the technicians, our event agency, our colleagues here in the studio. I would like to thank the interpreters. I hope that you hear now that more than 1,000 people are giving you a warm hand and applause. So it was such a good feeling. We had to cancel so many different events, but we are very happy now that we could create some jobs now for the people who work here as technicians. Thanks to all the speakers. It is not that easy in this time to get up and be at the desk at 7 in the morning, as in the case of our Latin American speaker, to do it from her home. Thank you very much. It worked out very well. A particular and great thank you goes to the crew and the team behind the scenes, and it is a bad word, manpower, because there are almost only women working here. I would like to thank Angela Kohls, our head of Department of Political Affairs, Saskia Ellenbeck. I would like to thank her, who steered and managed the project in Orad. Maybe it's better than steered, because Svenja Golombek did a lot of the work connected with that. I would like to thank her. I saw pictures on Twitter. It looks as if she was praying. I hope that she didn't have to do that, because everything was perfectly prepared. Melissa Gomez, you saw her as the co-moderator. She's the one who traveled most of all and who met most of the speakers in person. And I'm happy that due to she said that she came from Bogota, and it is a matter of her heart, the Sevilla. And I remember when we hired her that this was the reason why she started committing herself to this subject of cycle planning. So thank you to this great female team. Thank you to Christine Stein, our event manager. Previously, Christine was in charge of keeping the catering service and everything running on the stage. Now she is in charge of having everything running smoothly behind it, before the scenes. And Christine, we also had something to eat in contrast to you, dear listeners, and she also took care of that. I thanked all the speakers, but I would also like to thank the board members, Rebecca, and at the very end, Ulrich Siebert, our federal chairman. A fantastic job, Ulrich. 1,000 listeners, that's great, but still, it is such a pity that we didn't see each other in person. We urgently need to do that. Last word of gratitude is to Mrs. Steeger. More power for you and more space for the bicycle. From our campaign from last year, more power for you. This is the slogan here on this bag. And I brought something that actually only true ADFC members can get. So thank you for your great, well, I feel honored, and I will wear this mask. Thank you to you and to the entire team. I would also like to thank the entire team. The really good thing about these digital events is that they are sustainable, not only in such a way that insofar as you can reach so many people at once, and you can retrieve it on Monday. From Monday on, you will also see it on the YouTube channel, and it will stay there for good, and you will be able to follow up on that, and you can share these wonderful examples that we have seen, and you can get inspired by them. I wish you a lot of courage. I said that earlier on, that I think it's very important. Much success, and stay in good health. I would not have thought that we would say this so often, but it's really important. Thank you very much for having taken part, and all the best to you.